Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Friday morning. Lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining us for our Bible talk for today as we approach now the end of our adventure through the amazing book of Psalms. I hope you found them helpful. They're amazing, aren't they? The Old Testament hymn book. They're fantastic. I love their honesty. I love the poetry. It's just amazing. They're just amazing things. We need to make more of them in the morning service, to be honest, but they're just fantastic things. And I hope you found them really helpful. I know I certainly have, so thank you for that. Thank you for watching. Today's psalm is Psalm 143. There are 150 psalms, as you know. It's in book 5 of the 5 books of the Psalms. It's one of a group here connected, which are definitely written by David. We don't know the exact context of what was actually happening at the time. We know David wrote it, but it's the last of what's called the complaint psalms. From here on in, from Psalm 144 to the end, they're basically hymns of praise. But this is the last of what you might call the complaint psalms, where the guy's in problems. So without further ado, Psalm 143, here goes. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Give ear to my supplications in your faithfulness. Answer me in your righteousness. Do not enter into judgment with your servant, for no one living is righteous before you. For the enemy has pursued me, crushing my life to the ground, making me sit in darkness like those long dead. Therefore my spirit faints within me, my heart within me is appalled. I remember the days of old, I think about all your deeds. I meditate on the works of your hands. I stretch out my hands to you. My soul thirsts for you like a parched land. Answer me quickly, O Lord, my spirit fails. Do not hide your face from me, or I shall be like those who go down to the pit. Let me hear of your steadfast love in the morning, for in you I put my trust. Teach me the way I should go, for to you I lift up my soul. Save me, O Lord, from my enemies. I have fled to you for refuge. Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. Let your good spirit lead me on a level path. For your name's sake, O Lord, preserve my life. In your righteousness, bring me out of trouble. In your steadfast love, cut off my enemies and destroy all my adversaries, for I am your servant. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, as I said, it's the last of what you might call the complaint psalms. And there are quite a few of them. And usually what happens, the kind of general pattern, is that the person comes before God just as they are. They outline the problem before God. They're reminded how good God is. They ask God to help them, and they feel confident at the end. That's basically along those lines. So they come before God. They outline the situation before God. They're reminded how big and how good and how loving God is. They ask God to help them, and at the end, they feel generally more confident when they're finished than when they started. And that's the general pattern that happens in these complaint psalms. And Psalm 143 is kind of along those lines. And the situation here is that the person here is in deep trouble. It's David. David's here, and it's trouble which he's kind of as happened with Psalm 142 yesterday. He kind of feels there's got nothing left in the tank. He doesn't want to be like one of those that go down to the pit, and he feels that he hasn't got much left to do. He throws himself entirely on God, and that because he's clearly in a dire situation, and he brings a situation before God. And that's basically what's going on in Psalm 143. But there are 4 things really in this particular psalm. They're also along that general pattern, which I think need to be kind of brought out, which are kind of important. Firstly, which is very clear here, is that David recognises that his entire trust is in God. He says something interesting. He says, verse 2, do not enter into judgment with your servants, for no one living is righteous before you. In other words, he throws himself entirely on God's amazing mercy. And in a sense, I suppose that's the place we all have to be, the point where we have to depend completely on God. And David recognises here he's got nothing left in the tank. He has no right to ask God for anything, because in God's sight, if God enters into judgment, no one stands a chance, because God is just too good. So actually, he throws himself entirely on God's mercy. And actually, that's what's so good about things like when the prodigal son comes home. He throws himself entirely on the mercy of his father. And actually, here we have a situation where the guy throws, David is clearly in deep trouble. He's got nothing left to do. He's got nothing left to give. He's run out of resources. So he says, throw himself entirely on God. And that's kind of the situation that we need to do. So we have to remember that we have no right of ourselves to ask God for anything. But actually, if we throw ourselves entirely on God's mercy, that is when forgiveness can come. That's what we need to do. That's the first thing. The second thing he does, which is, again, is quite characteristic, is he reminds himself of God's deeds in the past. So in verse 5 he says, I remember the days of old, I think about your deeds, I meditate on the works of your hands. In other words, he reminds himself of how good God is. He reminds himself of the times when God's helped him in the past. And on the principle being that if God is like that, God will help him again now. God has been blessing in the past. Therefore, there's no reason to believe that God isn't going to kind of carry on blessing now. And that's, again, another thing that we could do, we're doing more of, really. As one of the reasons why being thankful is such a good thing, because it reminds us of the things that God has done. It's easy when things are getting on top of us. I mean, David, as I say, is clearly in deep jeopardy here. It's easy to our problems consume, so that's all we can think about. In this situation, David reminds us, I remember the days of old. I think about all your deeds. I meditate on the works of your hands. And with that in mind, he turns towards God. So far we recognise that David recognises that he has no right to ask God for anything, but he throws himself entirely on God's mercy. And next thing, he reminds himself of God's amazing deeds. The third thing he does is, and this is kind of quite interesting really, is he promises that going forward, he's going to be different. That going forward, he's going to obey God. And in a sense, one of the things he kind of says really is, if you help me, then I'll be yours from here on in. Verse 8, teach me the way I should go, for to you I lift up my soul. And in verse 10, let your good spirit lead me on a level path. Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. Let your good spirit lead me on a level path. In other words, I'm in deep doo-doo now. My life is in danger, but help me out now. And going forward, I will be yours. And you do hear some amazing... I remember a man I once knew years ago. He hadn't been a believer. His wife used to be, but he wasn't. And then one summer or one winter or something, he started coming to church every week after that. And I went for dinner at their house once, and I asked him why. Because his wife said, you got to ask him why. I asked him why. He said, well, basically he'd been skiing, and he found himself on a ski slope with nowhere to go, and had said, God, if you help me out of this one, I'll go to church from here on in. And he duly did, and as far as I'm aware, he did for the rest of his life. So in a sense, there are people that do that. And David is one of these people here, We don't know how he's got into the trouble he's in. We don't know how he's got into the predicament he's in. But basically he says, God, if you help me, if you help me rescue me from the situation, then I will be yours from here on in. And finally, the other thing he wants to say, which again is kind of similar, is he says to God, help me for your name's sake. It's interesting, hallowed be your name, we say in the Lord's Prayer. May your name be held holy. May your name be lifted high. May you have a good reputation. That's what it means. He's saying to God, when we pray in the Lord's Prayer, may you be well thought of. And David says something similar here. He says, for your name's sake. Verse 11, he says, where is it? Rescue me from the claws of somewhere. For your name's sake. I forget where he says that. Verse 11. Yeah, verse 11. For your name's sake, O Lord, preserve my life. In your righteousness, bring me out of trouble. In other words, everyone knows that I am your servant. Everyone knows I work for you, O God. So, help me and it will look good for you, is what he's kind of saying here. So, in the same way we can pray, God, may your name be held high. May you have a good reputation. In a sense, he's saying, for the sake of your reputation, help me. So that you can be known as a God who helps people in trouble. That's essentially what he's saying. For your name's sake, O Lord, preserve my life. In your righteousness, bring me out of trouble. In your steadfast love, move me forward and help me, and so on and so on and so on. So here we have this beautiful psalm, a typical psalm of complaint, the last of them, but you can see the general pattern that they have, where the person comes before God, outlines their situation before God. They're reminding themselves how good and how loving God is. They ask God to help them, and as a result, they feel more confident. But in this psalm, notice in particular, Psalm 143, firstly, his dependence on God and not on himself. Secondly, his remembrance of his past deeds. Thirdly, spot that actually he's saying, no, if you help me, God, I will be yours from here on in. I will follow life your way. And fourthly, as David is saying, hey, I'm your king, you put me here, so that you can be known with a good reputation, so that you can be known as God who helps people, that help me for your name's sake. Friends, I hope that makes sense. It's a beautiful psalm. Do enjoy it again at your will. 143, Psalm 144 tomorrow. I beg your pardon, after the weekend. Have a lovely weekend. Do join us at church. We'd absolutely love to see you. You'd be very, very welcome. Do please, as always, I say, please, could you share these messages with your friends? Other people can enjoy them too. God bless you. Thank you for watching.